All right, welcome to the Teaching a Rockstar podcast. And on this episode, we have Holli Merkel. And Holli is the principal out at Itasca Elementary School. And for those of you that have not recently boned up on your Texas geography, Itasca is just up the road, about 45 miles, I think, if I remember right, from Waco. Or if you want to look at a national landmark, they're about 60 miles north from where Chip and Joanna live, more importantly. All right. And let me tell you why Holli's on the show is she commented on a post and mentioned how before she got into education, she was employed by CPS. And I thought, man, like who better to have on the show to talk about and remind us about those heartbreaking stories that some of our kids are living through as they're in our classrooms, and how do we keep that at the forefront of our minds and remember what they're going through so we can better serve those kids. And she's amazing. I love her. You're going to love her too. Here we go. Teaching a Rockstar podcast with Holli Merkel. Let's do this. Now tell me the role that you currently serve in.
Now, as of the day after spring break of this year, I'm the elementary principal.
Now listen, I've taught in some small schools, so oftentimes like this is a type of promotion where like you leave on spring break and you come back and they say, guess what?
Yeah. Yes.
Because like as a teacher that, I can't tell you, in small schools I taught, how many times I've heard like, hey, so guess what you'll be teaching this year? But they don't tell you that, when you first interview or sign up for that job. That's kind of, the first day of school. Hey, by the way,
Yes.
you're also the Spanish teacher.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I love that. Here's the thing. Have you always taught in small schools?
I have. This is the only school that I've ever taught in.
I love it. And I didn't grow up in a small school, and I just kind of, I don't know. I never even thought about small schools when I was in school or in college or anything. Cause I just, I never, it just wasn't my reality. And then when I graduated, there's only a couple of jobs available for a band director. And that was my only option. So I went there, and like I can't even tell you how much I loved it. Like just the way that every kid does if you're going to play football, we need everybody playing football. And if we're going to be in the band, everybody needs to be in the band if we're going to have one. And half the girls split drill team, and the other half of the cheerleaders. And then we got kids in the junior high that work in the snack bar. I love every bit of it.
It is. It's awesome. It really is neat. It's given me lots of opportunities being here. So
that's the other thing, man. Like, I think, it's not just kids, it's like educators. Like if this program is going to work, it's like every day is an all hands on deck.
Absolutely.
You never know. Like, guess what? You need to sub in Miss Smith's reading class. Because Miss Smith's husband shot a deer, and she needs to go home, and she needs to help clean the deer. I mean, I love all that stuff.
Yes.
Here's why I really, really wanted to talk to you is, I do these posts in the morning, and like these little quotes, and I can't remember the exact one. It might have been something about, it's this concept like every kid has a story.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes we don't know what's really going on in that kid's life. And, I had, when I first started teaching, there's this phrase, this quote I heard, and it was, those kids, your kids will forever be better actors than you are a teacher. And I didn't know what that meant for years until I finally realized it. They'll act as if everything's just fine and everything's okay. And it's almost as if they're not acting. Like that's because that's their reality. Like this is what it is, so it must be okay. And then you commented on that, and it talked about that you had some experience working with CPS.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think of a better person in a position to really talk about some of the things that are going on in kids' lives that like we have no idea.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, it's not just kids in poverty. Like it's kids that like even like they have, the big fancy house and two parents and they're driving an Audi, but you don't know what's really going on behind the scenes in that house.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How did you get started with CPS? Was that your first gig out of college?
It sure was. Yes, it was. It was. Actually, I went to Sam Houston State University in Huntsville. My major was criminal justice. And so that was one of my very first gigs, actually in Houston is where I started, Houston, Texas. And my training went through during Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
So that was my time to get trained through that. So, yeah.
That's a steep learning curve. I was teaching school. I was teaching high school back then, and every day, it was a huge high school. We had close to 5,000 kids in the school, and every day we probably had 25 or 30 kids lined up to enroll. Coming from New Orleans and coming from Louisiana, and I mean, when I tell you these kids had nothing, it was literally like the shoes they were wearing was the shoes they owned. And the clothes they were wearing, that was all the clothes they owned.
Yes. Yes.
And so, and by the way, so how old are you at this point?
Me, I'm 36.
Not now. I would never ask you now, but then. Back then.
Oh, during the time? Yeah. I was fresh out of college, so probably 21, 22.
And at that time, when you were 21 and 22, this is like a lot this is a kid.
Yes. It was a lot at a a younger age of getting into that, especially being your very first job. At that time, the state started with the special investigators, and so they are ex-police or police that are wanting to get into, child, the CPS stuff at that point. And so we got to go through the trainings with them as well. And so hearing their stories were also impactful during that training time. So.
Yeah, and then when you start in a gig like that, is there like in teaching, as student teaching, was there somebody that kind of mentored you and helped you out as you were getting this program started?
We did. We actually had a pretty intense training, and then you go out with they have units, and so you go out with the units while you're still training, and so you get to go with the cases and see how, you kind of like ride along, I guess, is kind of how you start. So.
And so when you're 21 or 22 and you're walking into these situations, I mean, was it just, because I'm going to assume, I don't know if this is true, but I just assume you came from kind of a typical upbringing. You went to college and you had, a parent or two hanging around watching what was going on. You participated in school and all that stuff. You were involved in school and high school and you did activities. And so this was a whole new reality for you.
It was. Now, I have always been intrigued in helping in those areas. And so it was where I wanted to be. And so it wasn't so much of how some of my other colleagues were at the time. I wanted it, I wanted to go in and help and not steer away from it. So, but I did have a lot that were kind of afraid. And I think a lot of it had to do with just different, being afraid to see the difference,
Yeah, because I think it's almost as if it's like a whole different language, like it's a whole different world. It's a whole different reality, and to try to wrap our, just kind of this secure middle class upbringing, if but then to see kids in that kind of desperate poverty, it had to be shocking for you.
Oh, it was very shocking. And it was a point of, at that point, you don't know, sometimes you just don't know where to begin when you haven't had that experience to know where to start, and because sometimes you can start in a place where maybe, from my role, it would be maybe, I see your shoes, but that's the only thing they have. And so to say a comment about their shoes, it hurts them, and you wouldn't have thought that, so it's, you got to be very careful, very careful.
It really is. I can remember watching teachers, and I'm sure I've made this mistake too in my time, but even having a talk about a kid, trying to talk to a kid about something as simple as going to college and really pushing a kid, hey man, and like even saying something as innocent as, don't you want something more than what you have right now? Like that comment alone is incredibly disrespectful to that kid's family and how hard they work and how they're trying. And, sometimes, trying to push our own reality off on kids is damaging.
Yes, it's highly damaging. And you have to be very careful and realize that what they have is everything they have, as much as what we think we have is everything we have. So not devaluing, taking the value out of that is very important.
Hey, man, that's critical. Hey, without, I don't want you to, cross any lines of confidentiality or privacy, but just like some of the things that you've seen, like when you were out there. And hey, by the way, now, did you grow up in a small town?
I did. I grew up in Hillsborough, Texas. So I did grow up in a small town.
All right, so here we go. I know Hillsborough. I've been there a few times, and so so you grew up in Hillsborough. You go to the big metropolis compared to Hillsborough of Huntsville, and now like you're in the city of Houston. Were you living here in Houston?
I lived in the Woodland Spring area.
Yeah, so you're like in some apartment, and that's beautiful up there, and you're doing that whole thing, and so you start going into these homes, and what were some of the things that you've seen?
I've fallen through floors
Yeah.
from them, using the restroom on the floor. I've been in homes that uh, words can't even explain of how it was, just the smells and plumbing. We take that sometimes, for granted, the things like that. I think a lot of times I would not, you get really trained at not looking at the home, like the material things. And so looking at the whole person and, some of the cases of, seeing the drugs and what they did to the families, children. I worked with one that was a 2-year-old that had an STD at 2, and human trafficking right now is really big, but I saw that at 21 and 22. And so a lot of it is hard to explain because it is so much to explain. I didn't even know that cockroaches bit. I walked into homes when they were covering the walls, I didn't even know that there was anything other than that, and kids bitten by them. Kids in the same diapers for days at a time. And then, looking at a lot of it as the cycle and giving those, finding those boundaries of helping the parents who have been in the cycle to help them get help was really big for me.
Yeah, man, I have to, a couple of things. One is, the fortunate part of me starting my career in a small town was that I could drive around town and I would see a kid in my class standing outside of a home that you described. I could see what that home was on the outside. I knew it was probably worse on the inside.
Oh, yes.
There'd be dogs chained to trees and a car sitting on its side, rusted there for years, and the whole house. It's not even it's like this, not a trailer. There's some sort of other structure, and it all kind of leans one way. And it changed everything for me because as mad as I would get at that kid for whatever reason, because I was impatient and ineffective when I first started, like I would picture that kid standing right there, sitting on that tire out front of his door because they used a tire for the step to get into and it would change everything for me. And I think some of the challenge with our giant suburban school districts is like these kids come in, we put them on the bus and we send them home and we have no idea where they just kind of go out into whoever we just, there's no connection with them once we put them on the bus. And I think that has an impact on the teaching in the classroom for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And it's one thing that really sparked me is when you said that they act okay when they come, and a lot of that is very concerning because it's so much trauma that they've dealt with that they're tolerant of it now, and they're desensitized to a lot of things. And so when we bring them, we get upset. Well, that's nothing to them. This schoolwork we've got so many bigger things sometimes that we need to address other than those 5 problems that's sitting in front of them. One that I had was a second grader who had been dealing drugs for her family. And that was that was one of the most difficult cases because she was a young girl and she was nonverbal in the school, but she was so verbal outside of school because she was so trained at being taught what to say and what not to say for so long.
Yeah.
So
That's hard, man. And I have to tell you, I've got to probably I'm going to assume that when you came into this teaching business and you would see, I'm sure, because if we all, even great teachers, we forget and we get emotional and yell or whatever, but you were probably at a point in your life because you've seen so much that it was almost painful for you to see some teacher yell at a kid or something when you're thinking, man, you have no idea. And you can look at a kid and like, that's a cockroach, but I know what that looks like.
mhm. Absolutely. It was very hard. It was a hard, because also kind of looking at where I was at now too, the role. One thing that I loved about being a teacher compared to being working for the agency was that I knew that they were okay when they were at school.
Yeah.
I wasn't leaving them with someone that I didn't know, hoping and praying that they're going to get all the love and the help that they need and not knowing for sure if that's really going to happen. And, you have big decisions to make because that's one of the biggest decisions maybe for them for their whole life. So knowing that they're okay in your classroom and getting fed, at least we have breakfast, lunch, and dinner here. We have an ACE program that provides that. So it's very comforting in those areas along the lines.
Yeah. And I mean, at this time of the year, this is something I always keep in mind. And there's a principal. Well, she's not a principal anymore. She works for the Flipping Group. Her name is Kristen Booth, and she used to do these posts right before holidays. And this, if she was still principal, she'd probably be doing one right about now. Is to keep in mind as we're counting down the days for summer and putting that number. And a lot of teachers put that number on the board, and they're thinking about they're out of here and they're making plans. They're going to sit by the pool and they're going to go on vacation, and they're talking about that openly about their plans. Like there's kids in that classroom, in every single classroom, counting down the days, not because it's good, but because this is the place of solitude and where they get nourished, not just in terms of nutrition, but also just emotional health and intellectual, and just this place of safety and well-being. And it's sad, man.
It is. And it's funny you say that because actually I do a weekly newsletter, and that's exactly what I put in my weekly newsletter this last time was please remember, because these kids, some of them are acting out too because the anxiety, they're anxious. They know what's coming.
Yeah. And, for a lot of kids, and I know that kids, this is the crazy part, how much kids want to truly be independent, but deep down inside, what they really want is a sense of structure and safety and what they know what to expect. And they love that feeling more than anything. And like for lots of kids, that's the one place is like they have that because their bells ring. They know exactly where they go. They know exactly how much time they have to do that. They know when they can go to lunch. They know when they go to the restroom. There's recess and all that stuff. But even in the opposite ends of the spectrum, a kid in poverty or even a kid like of high wealth, a lot of times those kids even in the summer have no structure. And you're right, man. Like this is an emotional time for kids because they know subconsciously. I'm not suggesting a kid is consciously thinking about I'm going to act out because I'm not going to have structure in a few days, but they feel that coming on, and it's tough for kids, man.
Yes, it is most definitely. It's and I think it's hard for people to, when you haven't seen it. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to sometimes to think to have empathy, and sympathy for them too. It's hard.
Yeah, it's really hard because I'm telling you, like it's so hard to figure out how to make sense of it because you've never experienced it, and it's really hard if you've never seen it, never been in it, never lived in it or experienced it. It's almost impossible to put yourself in that kid's shoes.
Absolutely.
And for when you were with the agency with CPS, and how much work, if any, I mean, I'm sure the caseload was just insane. But how much was there any effort to follow up with kids at school or work with teachers or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. There was a lot of that. So my very first time was conservatorship, and so I was like had to go. They were the children that had been removed, and so I got to go visit them every. I had to make sure I made contact with them at a certain time points. And so a lot of times I would go to school. I would sit in ARD meetings for my kids, and if they got in a fight and it was, pressing charges, especially at bigger schools, they have resource officers. So they were, of course, we're getting my kids that were in at that time, TYC. So I would go visit them, and those are the things. And we had the PALS program too for the kids that were, moving out for 18, but I didn't work with a lot of them because they had another whole entire program, which was amazing for them to help get them prepared for life, for life, college, and whatever path that they might want. So,
Yeah. It's interesting as educators, and we have these, We have these kids come in, and it's almost as if, like, when they walk through the door of our classroom, they cross the threshold of the door. We expect them to drop all that, like, forget everything you just endured for the last, 12 hours at your home, and here we go, it's school time. Let's start over, and for like it's impossible. I mean, it's impossible for a teacher as an adult to drop. Something happened in the house and a dog ran out the door and they're trying to leave for work and spilled coffee on the shirt, like all that. And they bring that into the classroom. And this kid has like this monumental amount of emotional baggage that, and so when you started teaching, did you feel like you were more equipped to deal with that because of all that you've seen?
Absolutely. And I use it every day. There's not a day that goes by that I don't use some experience, or something that I had program director that was over me, supervisor. She was phenomenal. And so her guidance is what helped me. But I had it helped shape everything and every feeling that I had for the students, that to fight for them too. Sometimes our kids they don't have mom and dad at home to help be in the know here. And so to help also be their voice at times that they needed it was also a help.
Yeah. Yeah, because, just like you went into the CPS thing at age of 21 and 22, we have, and that is, it's just an amazing experience, because we have teachers come in at 22 and all they know is their experience of having two parents, going to youth group, being a scout, being in competitive cheer, in club soccer, touring around the Gulf Coast, they go to college, that whole thing. And it's almost as if like other realities don't exist.
Yes, I agree. And it's interesting earlier that you said that, about even, the rich that have everything. Because I think now we're really working in too much into a perfect world for our kids, and those are a lot of the ones that hide a lot too, are our kids. It doesn't just mean our kids that live in poverty, or have domestic violence at home, but it's also our other children too. They might still have that exact same things going on, but we just sometimes look over it, and a lot of that is emotional. They feel like they always have to be very perfect, or if they mess up one time at home, it's really, really bad for them. So keeping that in mind too is important.
It's true, man. Like if you think about, I was telling somebody the other day, they were talking to me. They go to a therapist, like a counselor, and I said, "Well, here's the thing, man. Like, you think about how many therapists they are, and they're all booked. Like every counselor, like kids that grew up in poverty don't go to those people. They can't afford to do that. Like, who goes to like reason because it's like regular, everyday, middle class, upper class, high wealthy. Those are the people that go there, and those offices are filled all because of those stories that these kids endure when they're growing up, and they just don't have anybody to talk to about it.
Yes, because they don't want to look bad, their family.
Yeah.
It is.
As far as the small town thing was concerned, teaching there, one of the interesting things in the town in which I taught was like we didn't have all that many behavior problems, and like I realized later, it was because everybody knew if you were a behavior problem, and that was a problem. You know what I mean? Like in the suburbs out here in Houston, like although where you were, like up in Conroe ISD or Spring or Aldine, like if you're a knucklehead in class, man, you're one of thousands. Who knows? But when you teach in a little 1A town where they got 400 people in a community, everybody knows. So kids kind of act, yeah, it's interesting.
It is interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, I was also the big part was like everybody went to church, and that was not that that's important, but it does provide people a sense of community and connection and a common value system. And when I showed up in town, I didn't go to one of those churches, and so, but all the kids told me it's like my first week or two there. Kids would come back on Monday morning. They say, "Hey, Bowman, you were on the prayer list again." I said, "What?"
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, they said, I said, well, what were they saying at the prayer list? They said, well, at my church, they said that they're praying for you because you don't go to church. I said, you don't know what I do. Just because I don't go to your church, it doesn't mean I go to church. They said, no, we asked around. Everybody knows you don't go to church. So we prayed for you. And then another kid said, well, my church, we prayed for you to find a wife. I said, a wife? Why? They said because if you don't get married, you're going to leave. Everybody knows that about small town teaching. If you come and you're single, you're leaving soon if we don't get you married. And then another one told me, oh, this is the best one. They said, I lived in a town. I lived about 30 miles away because there's no place to live in that little town. So I lived in a bigger town about 30 miles away. And then another kid said, well, in my church, we prayed for you because of the movie you rented at Blockbuster. And I said, what? And they said, yeah, you rented a rated R movie at Blockbuster. Or somebody saw you there, so we all prayed about it. Then I went, oh my God, this is unbelievable.
Gosh.
I know, that's a small town thing, man.
Yeah. All right. And so with your school now in your role are there times that you have to remind teachers and just that, because here's the thing, like every teacher that's still in the classroom, they're compassionate and loving and they want to do a great job. But because this is so hard and so overwhelming, there's got to be times that you, have an opportunity to remind teachers what some of these kids are going through.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, it's not easy every day with some of the situations that get brought, so I think kind of holding all of us accountable, I'll say I have to be honest and say we have a phenomenal team here, that a lot of them have been here for a long time, that know a lot of, families and things, but holding each other accountable. Hey, maybe you need a break, or hey, let me give you a break, or hey, send out something positive to each other or uplifting. And sometimes a lot of those things, the small things, go a long way.
Yeah, I think having relationships like that in a school where people are connected and love each other, been there together, and they teach for years together. Like when you're at that point, that's a great place to be so aware of each other, and like each other's emotional health.
Oh yes.
Where like you can say, hey man, I got you. I got
That
you
you,
for this period. Bring your kids on over to my room. I got you.
We actually have some that do that, and it's good for it, and that's what you do because we're human, and it's okay, and I always tell them, myself too, if you mess up, the best thing and the most important is to apologize. That's showing that you are human too, and what a great thing to teach a kid, hey, we mess up too. It's okay to apologize.
It's everything like that. Like there was a teacher that posted yesterday about a situation in his school where he he called out a kid about I forget, I can't remember the details. I'm not even sure he put it, but he said I think he made fun, not made fun, but talked about a kid that was absent a lot, and and then the mom called yelling at him because singled out her kid and his class, and then the principal called him, and the dude was just devastated. Like he had no intention of any of like this happening. And then he counseled with the kid. He apologized. He called the family and apologized. He went to their apartment and apologized. And he was posting about how horribly he felt. I'm like, brother, that is probably the best lesson the kid had all school year. The fact you went to the apartment, you owned it in front of the whole class, you apologized, then you sought out the kid individually and apologized. I said, brother, that's like the best teaching of the school year for you.
Oh yeah, he'll never forget it. He'll never forget that moment.
Yeah, and that's like such a good point. And like this guy teaches social studies, and I really hope that student learns about social studies for sure. But what the kid really learned in there is how to be a great dad.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yes, I totally agree. Yes, that's important.
It's huge, man. And when those kids come into your classroom and as you're teaching, and I don't know about you, but what it changed for me, because one of the experiences I went through, one of my first years, the first day back to school, professional development in August, is Ana Lopez our principal, she locked the doors to the school on the first day, and teachers couldn't get in. We're just standing there, and she showed up on like in the school bus, driving a school bus. And she said, "Get on board," and we all get in the school bus, and she drove us around, and we got out of the school bus right into the street, went walking into the neighborhoods, and she wanted you to see where your kids live,
Yes.
because and she said this, and so that we would, and she would show us. You say, you see this extension cord? It's because they don't have power, but they're going to borrow power from them, and they're going to pay them back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she said, and she showed us. Well, see that porta potty right there. They stole that from somewhere, and that it's in because they don't have plumbing. And went through the whole thing, and at the end of the trip, the end of the day, she said, "I just want you to remind. This is a junior high. I want you to remember when you assign kids homework, picture their home. That's the home in which you're expecting them to work. Keep that in mind."
Yeah. Powerful.
It really is, and like when you assign a kid a project.
Yep.
And you expect this kid is going to show up with those silly, trifold poster board things. Like,
Yeah.
where's the kid going to get that?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're right, man. The other thing I was thinking is when you're talking about the challenges of teachers just emotionally, like at this time of the year, I always say, like in August and in September, like there's outstanding teachers.
Oh, yeah.
And then in May, they often turn into outstanding teachers, like outstanding in the hallway, trying to get themselves to go in there.
It is challenging, and it's challenging. And I think, as administrators, it's important to recognize that. Because again, to remind that they're human and they're with this every day. They're seeing this all day, whereas sometimes we don't see it, going into meetings or this or that. And so I think it's important as even, that we're a team and, they're in the trenches all day. And so making sure that we recognize that is so important, and giving them something to help them hang on to continue to be in there is important.
Yeah, one of the schools I worked at, the administration called me in, and I was doing some coaching, some instructional coaching, and they're asking some feedback. And anytime anybody asks for feedback, I'm like, "Are you sure?"
You really?
Because I'll tell you, you're doing a great job if that's what you need to hear. I'll tell you that. But if you want to know, man. And I helped them understand one of the things that, like, it was a huge administrative staff, and it was a large school. And I said, just the fact that you guys huddle up in the morning after these kids go to class, and some teachers have conference. Whenever there's a conference period, there's always a few APs and a counselor or two, administrators sitting around drinking coffee in a little huddle right there. And yet that pisses teachers off because we can't get away, man. Like, we're in there. You can't leave the classroom, and we're surrounded with 32 kids. And the fact, just the seeing that they get to take this little coffee break and chit chat and gossip, I know it sounds silly, but when you're a teacher stuck in the emotional room of fourth graders, up to your ankles in a sea of fourth graders yelling and screaming about something, it's really hard to watch other people take a break.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Hey, when teachers come in and they're new, if you could give them, and let's suppose they're just a typical teacher that went to school and did their 4 years of college, and and they were involved, and they did their student teaching, and they show up on a campus with their own classroom, real kids, real teaching. If you could give them any bit of advice, what would it be?
Be real, and it's okay to give a part of you, and just kind of listen is so important. Listening to them and being real, and it's okay to be human. And I think sometimes, a lot of times as teachers, we get into this where we have to be this certain thing that, back in the day it was this proper, never mess up. Everybody has to sit in desks and, but do what you're comfortable doing. And it's so important to have a passion for what you do, because what you do is going to impact these kids forever. And I don't think a single person can ever say that they don't remember something that even happened to them in kindergarten. So I think sometimes our younger ones think, oh, that they're building that foundation, and that's the importance of everything, and so that everyone else can keep building on top of that. And so just being real and recognizing and taking some time to research. If they don't have the answer, go find the answer. And it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say that. And I think sometimes we are so competitive in this line of work sometimes that we forget the real reason why we're here, and our why, I would hope, would be for these kids and the passion that you have to go into here. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, and that's powerful. I think, it's this generation of kids that they can really sniff it out when you're faking it, especially if you're trying to do that thing up in front of the class. This is my class. I've got the big desk. You've got the small desk. That should tell you something.
Yes.
That whole thing, like they know, man, they know you're faking it. They know that's not who somebody really is.
Yes. Yes.
And it's, man, it's just detrimental to that, and it's so true. These kids really need to have that deep, relationship with someone. And one of the things I always say, and people think I'm crazy about this, but it's so true, is, it's almost as if the older the kid gets, the more they need it. Is one thing I've always did in my classes was show and tell. And I've taught like everything, high school, the whole bit. Let me tell you something, man. No one loves show and tell more than a bunch of high school seniors.
Oh, yes. Yes. I believe that.
And like I go first, and I'll bring something. I always tell them, hey man, here are the rules. Like you got to bring something from your house. It has to be your mom or dad needs to know you're bringing it. You can't sneak it out. Make sure it fits inside of a backpack. It cannot be breathing. Make sure it's not breathing, and it's legal. Like if there was a fire and you had to save something, what would be the something? And these stories with which these kids came to class was just. Mm-hmm. And so I thought we'd do a few of them like on a Friday. Nuh-uh, man, it takes like one can go on a Friday because it takes a long, but it's so worth it. And, people, other teachers get so nervous, like, Bowman, man, you're supposed to be, teaching biology in here. Listen, man, I'll get to that. The reason we can cover so much content so fast is because of show and tell on Friday.
Mm-hmm. It's the little things that we forget. It's super, super big. And it's so important that we continue to remember that. Because even for us, those are the things that we remember. It's not the big things. It's the little things that count. So
it's true. I can't tell you how many times I have, especially my gig now, like I'll be on the road in some airport and I'll hear Bowman and I always get so nervous, like, oh my God, no. And it's some kid and I'll say, I'll never forget the time that I'll never forget the time that our class, and I can't tell you how many times I have no idea what they're talking about. I'm sure it happened, but I believe him. But, it's so true. Like, we try to create these monumental moments and, but really what it is, it's the tiniest thing that gets embedded in that kid's head forever. Yep.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, man, I can't thank you enough for doing this. I so appreciate that there's, that there's people like you out there that before you've came to this career really got to see what's happening in the lives of kids, and now you're in a position you get to share that with other teachers. It's so, so powerful, and I love all that you have going on.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. And if there's any questions or anything, please feel free later on to ask.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.